We are gonna friggin' die. That's what Charlie Moe told me when he was explaining a mission that he was on in 1989 in the Republic of Panama during Operation Just Cause. Now imagine the dictator Noriega has finally pissed off the United States to the nth degree, and we launch an armada into that country, and it's Christmas Day. And you've got the 82nd Airborne down there. You've got the 7th Light Infantry down there. You've got the Marines down there. Every kind of special operations force, including SEALs and Rangers down there. And there's a whole battalion of Special Forces, 3rd Battalion, 7th Group, that was already living in Panama. They lived in Panama. And so they were able to not only select the strategic targets that they were going to take down as part of the invasion, they were able to do close recce, close reconnaissance on these targets all the time, just in their daily life. So you can imagine, once the green light was given to invade Panama, within literally a couple of hours, the Special Forces guys had dropped their targets, they were taken down, and they were looking for the next type of work that they were going to do. Well, the Armada, the Joint Task Force that had come into Panama, had achieved its missions very quickly. I mean, the Panamanian Defense Forces in the city had fallen. Noriega was on the verge of giving up. A lot of his senior leaders had been captured, but you still had thousands of Panamanian Defense Forces out in the hinterlands, plus the dignity battalions, the irregular thugs that were out there. And there were a lot of troops that still needed to be dealt with. Now, these folks were out away from the city. They were scared. They weren't sure how to come in, and they didn't necessarily know how to surrender. Well, the United States military at the time was planning these massive clearing operations that were going to launch large formations of troops into the rural areas. They would sweep these rural areas, basically decimate them, and, force and coerce the Panamanian Defense Forces to surrender. Well, the Special Forces guys who lived in Panama knew, A, that's a problem. B, we're going to have to clean up the mess. C, there's probably a better way to do this. And so they started reaching out to these commanders in the rural areas who they had relationships with. The Special Forces guys had trained with them before because they lived in Panama. The SF guys spoke Spanish. They knew these guys and their families. And so they devised a plan called Operation Ma Bell. And Major Kevin Higgins was one of the first guys to lead this, where they basically choppered into a rural outlying community up in the Chiriquí Mountains. They landed just outside the range of the military cuartel. They went over to an elementary school. Now remember, this is back before cell phones. There was no internet. So they needed to surprise these Panamanian Defense Forces with a phone call that basically says, hey, we're here, you know us, surrender to us, or take your chances with the Armada in an hour, right? That was basically the plan. And they looked up the phone numbers of these commanders, I shit you not, in the Panamanian phone book, right? And so these guys fly in, they land at a school under Major Kevin Higgins' command. They get out, they walk to the only payphone in the area. They put their dime in the payphone to call the cuartel commander. And guess what? That's right, Murphy is part of Operation Just Cause. The payphone is out of commission. So they're talking about what they're going to do, and all of a sudden this little fella behind the newspaper, a Panamanian guy, says, Senors, the phone is broken. They're like, yeah, we can see that, genius, thank you for that. And he's like, but what if you use the phone in the elementary school? They said, sir, it's Christmas Day, the school's locked. That won't work. He said, yes, it will. I'm the janitor. I have a key. So the little guy gets up, you can't make this stuff up, takes the Major Higgins and his Special Forces team into the school, unlocks it for him. They use the principal's phone, and they call the cuartel commander, and they say, listen, we're 10 minutes away. You know us. This is Kevin Higgins. I've trained with you. Either you surrender to us, and we'll treat you and your men with honor, or you can take your chances with the Marines and Rangers who will be here in 1 hour, and they will decimate everyone. We'll be there in 10 minutes. Click. Hangs the phone up. They jump in the choppers, and they make the 10-minute flight over to the cuartel. And as they fly over, this is when that staff sergeant told me, we're going to die, right? But instead, you know what they see? Hundreds of Panamanian Defense Forces lined up in formation on the soccer field, weapons stacked with their commander at the front of the formation, prepared to surrender. They effected the surrender with 1/3 of the number of Panamanian soldiers. There was only a handful of Green Berets. They effected the surrender without a shot fired. Operation Mawbell was formed. It was rinsed and repeated all across the country of Panama. And guess what? Every single rural cartel surrendered in the entire country without a shot fired. No one tells that story. No one knows that story, right? You won't see that one on the Hollywood big screen, but think about the blood and treasure that saved. Think about the relationship with Panama that we enjoy today that we would not have had. Think about the number of American lives and Panamanian lives lost had we not pursued this. Guys from the bottom up seeing the local solution and saying, this is what we need to do. You know why that worked? Because they got surrounded on purpose. They went local. They worked from the inside out. And I will tell you, that type of approach, that type of mindset works just as well in your nonprofit, just as well in your business, just as well on your school board, right? Because this is how humans are actually designed to operate. Anytime you have to move people to action to get them to follow you because they want to, not because they have to, especially when trust is low and the stakes are high, getting surrounded is a great way to do this. It's the main theme of my book, Game Changers, and the second edition of it is coming out. The Citizen's Guide is coming out this December 7th, this Thursday as we film this. And I wrote this because I want citizens, people like you, to be more informed, more activated about ISIS and what we're facing than we've ever been before, because I think it's the only way we're going to defeat these guys after a 16-year war. But the principles and lessons that we learned as Green Berets and special operators in these rough villages, they're just as relevant in your life today. Wait for the airplane to go over here. All right. That interlude brought to you by your local aviation company. So, here's the thing. The stuff that we learned in those villages, it's just as relevant in your life. It's just as relevant in your business, right? And getting surrounded is the second game changer principle that we're going to be talking about. It's the theme for this week. It's a huge part of what I teach in the private sector. And I want to break it down for you. I mean, first of all, get your copy of Game Changers. It's going to be on Amazon on December 7th. It's a quicker read. You can read this thing in about 3 or 4 hours, but there's a whole chapter in there on getting surrounded. But let me kind of break it down for you, right? Last week we talked about meeting people where they are, not where you want them to be. That's essential. But now you got to get surrounded. You got to get surrounded like Major Kevin Higgins did. You got to have the confidence, right, that you can immerse yourself in the culture, the environment of wherever you are and find very relevant, appropriate solutions for moving people to action from the inside out. I've been doing this for decades and it works. It's a mindset shift. Some of you do it instinctively. I want you to move the needle from instinct to skill, right? So for any movement like this, I don't care if it's Romy Camargo, the Green Beret who runs with Gabby, his wife, the Stay in Step Spinal Cord Injury Recovery Center. I don't care if you're launching a new online Yoli or Beachbody product. I don't care if you're Greg Parsons and moving a product for Semper Investments into Europe. I don't care if you're the leader of a commercial bank who's trying to get your executive leadership team to come closer together and get buy-in from your associates, or if you're on the school board in my hometown of Mount Ida, Arkansas, and you want to move people to a certain decision or action. Getting surrounded is absolutely critical because today we have an epic erosion of trust in our society across life and business. 2/3 of Americans say they don't trust their neighbor. 77% of Americans say that we're hopelessly divided. 84%, according to CEG Worldwide, of high net worth earners would get rid of their financial advisors if they had a choice. 84%, right? So trust is low and stakes are high. How do you move people to action? 3 things about getting surrounded that I want you to think about. One is bottom up, right? Think bottom up. Think inside out. The tendency in this day and age, especially in a Western society, in a transactional society where it's all about, the transaction. It's all about doing business from the top down. Top down tends to be our tendency. And I will tell you guys, in most situations where you're trying to move people to action, whether that's to get your associates to buy into your vision, to get your employees to believe in a new policy change, to get your clients to support a new product line, I'm telling you, if you come from the top down, if you try to jam people up, that's the enemy, right? Putting your hands on your hips and saying, because I said so, damn it, right? That type of coercive approach as a default mechanism for leadership, it moves people away from you, not towards you. It's not it's basically an antibody, right? It's an antibody for progress. You know, it does not accelerate progress in the way that you want. It doesn't accelerate people to action. So thinking of the top down, coming from the top down and just injecting yourself into a situation and prescribing a solution before you're really surrounded and immersed in the problem is a bad move, especially today, right? And you can see it all over the place. You can see that trust is eroding, and people, they don't buy into that. People don't like it when you do that, and they don't follow that. They'll only follow it as far as they have to, and then they'll bail on you. So I'd like you to think about anytime that you have to move people to action, anytime you want to inspire people to do something bigger than themselves, I'd like you to think about it from the bottom up or coming at it from the inside out, right? Movements typically start at the community level. That's true in Panama, like it was with Major Higgins. It was true in Afghanistan when we moved into 113 villages in 2010. We had to start at the community level first. We had gotten it wrong for 10 years. We tried to come from Kabul, the capital, right? And after spending $16 million for every Taliban we killed, you know, and $250,000 for every bomb we dropped, we recognized that the communities were not on board, right? And if the communities are not on board, nothing's going to happen for stability in Afghanistan. And if the communities are not on board in your business, the groups are not on board in your business, it doesn't matter how great your vision is. It doesn't matter how much common sense it makes or how fiscally responsible it is. It's not going to matter. The communities have to be bought in, right? So movements start at the community level. I'd like you to think about things from a community-based approach. Again, whether you're law enforcement or whether it's the communities inside your organization, I encourage you to start at that level, right? Those small in-groups and moving them to action. Top down is the enemy. I mean, this is a rooftop leadership mindset. If you haven't watched my TEDx talk that I did in Santa Barbara, I encourage you to go onto my website. It's right there on the main page and watch that. Just watching that 18-minute TED talk, you can see exactly what I mean by, getting surrounded. It's basically inspiring people to climb up on the proverbial rooftop, even when it's dangerous, even when it's risky, and stand shoulder to shoulder with you, not because they have to, but because they choose to. It's a mindset, this bottom-up approach, and it's absolutely essential. The second thing I'd like you to think about after bottom-up is timing is everything, right? When we want to move people to action, when it comes to getting surrounded, timing really matters, especially when there's low trust and high conflict in a society or in your business, or when people are skeptical or distracted. Here's what I've learned in 2+ decades of doing Green Beret work and now 5 years of leading and training corporate leaders, Fortune 100 companies, financial advisors. There are very few home runs in life. Did you know that? I don't care what your initiative is, what your sales program is. If you think that you're going to walk up to the plate and smack a grand slam, right? That's foolish thinking, and you're probably going to strike out, right? Any baseball coach will tell you that if you walk up to the plate trying to hit a home run, what's going to happen, Wes? You're going to strike out, right? That's what's going to happen. Home runs are great, and when they happen, they're great, but most hitters are trying to make contact, right? They're just trying to make contact with the ball. The reality is in your life, again, whether it's a sales initiative, a new product line, or you're trying to implement a vision at work, base hits are the most likely thing that are going to happen. Stuart Diamond, the author of Getting More and one of the best negotiators in the world, he says all negotiations are incremental. And he's right. If you're going to move things and move the needle, right, it's more like you're going to carry the ball down the yard 3 to 5 yards at a time. And then you're going to string those gains together cumulatively over time for strategic gains. You've got to be comfortable enough in your own skin. You've got to be comfortable enough that the mission and the vision is bigger than you. And you've got to have enough trust in the organizational capability that you can gain these things over time. Timing matters. There are no home runs in most situations. And when you get them, great. Celebrate the hell out of them. But you're going to win the game. You're going to move the needle. You're going to get surrounded, right, by base hits, incremental gains, singles and doubles, right? Making a connection here, listening here, getting insight here, putting this policy in place first, right? Timing matters. The other thing is I've found if you're going to try to move people to action If you try to implement first from the top down and say, okay, this is how we're going to do it, and you do that in a trust-depleted environment, which we've already established is most of the places you live and work, you're going to create an insurgency in your organization. Did you know that? Just by definition of human nature, if you put your hands on your hips and you walk up to me and say, because I said so, this is what we're going to do, you've already created an insurgency in your midst. I know a little bit about insurgencies. I've been around them a few days, right? And that's how they start, right? It's the human resistance to top-down coercion, right? So I encourage you to look at timing from a different perspective. What if you get buy-in from the bottom first? What if before you roll out that sales plan or that policy change, you actually go out in a series of town halls like one of the guys I coach in the commercial bank did, and you actually engage the people first? What if you're going to roll out an initiative to help give an even playing field for women in the workplace? You actually talk to resilient leaders in the female community first and get a sense of what's going on, right? Timing in the sense that get buy-in from the bottom first. This can have an enormous impact. One of the guys I coach, his name's Nick, he's a financial advisor. He's trying to get me to come out and coach some of his other financial advisors in his firm. Well, he has a great plan for it, and he sent the email out to him, hey, this is the time that I'm thinking about doing. And you know what happened? And I don't think you'll mind me sharing this, is several of his peers said, hey man, how come you didn't talk to us first? How come you're just giving the date out? This is how humans are wired. And these are friends of Nick's, right? They weren't being malicious. It's just that's the way it works. And it wasn't anything on Nick's part to try to jam them up, but it's just a subtle reminder that when thinking about timing in terms of getting surrounded and why getting surrounded matters, get the buy-in from the bottom first and then work it up to the top. You'll be amazed. If you allow that to inform your policy, if you allow that kind of grassroots input to inform your sales program or how you approach things, guess what? All the potential insurgents who would tube your plan are in your camp. You understand what I'm saying? Do you understand the gold that this has for you in terms of strategic output? No one does this shit anymore. I know because I travel all over the country working with corporate leaders on trust issues. And every time I see it, they try to inject or push a top-down strategy, right, in a resource-scarce, trust-depleted environment, and they create an insurgency, right? So timing matters. Get the bottom buy-in first. One other thing about this, take the time to frame the problem with the folks at the community level. Whether that community is, again, in a school board, whether it's inside your organization, I don't care. You've got to frame the problem first. See, what happens is a lot of times leaders, they come out, they go to the whiteboard and they say, okay, check it out. Here's the problem, right? This is the problem, and here's how we're going to solve it. What do you think everybody in the audience is thinking? Wes, what do you think they're thinking?
Not going to do it.
Not going to do it because that's not the problem. Right? How do you know the problem? You're sitting up there in the ivory tower. You didn't include me in the discussion on the problem, so I'm not following you. We saw this in the most dangerous places on earth in Pashtun tribal villages when we came in and said, hey, guess what? Afghanistan's unstable, so have we got good news for you. We're going to instill a liberal Jeffersonian democracy. Yay! Crickets. Tumbleweed comes by the fire pit, right? Why? Who's Jefferson, right? Was he an Alakazai or an Alizai? We took no time to establish, right, and get buy-in of what the problem is. Framing the problem is one of the most important things you can do as a leader. And how you frame the problem is collaborative. The key is to get a definition of the problem from the folks who are in it, who are living it every day. You can only do that, guys, if you get surrounded. If you stand on the edge of the problem with the rest of the mouth breathers, with your hands in your pocket, and admire the problem, and comment on the problem, and talk about how the big man stumbles, who gives a shit? Because you're not living in the problem. You have no relevance to the problem, and therefore the folks who are living in the problem will not see your proposal as credible. You're not a stakeholder. You haven't included the other stakeholders. You see what I mean? Right? So if you can work from the bottom up, and get surrounded and include the relevant parties and frame the problem, the solutions are amazing. You may remember last week I talked about Captain Vernon Gillespie in Vietnam when the camps were revolting, right? The easy thing would have been to just talk to his special forces Vietnamese counterpart, but he didn't just do that, did he? He framed the problem across all levels of the human domain to include the Montagnard tribesmen, and it was actually an ancient tribal ceremony that they did that was the solution, and it worked. And it didn't just work in that camp, it put down the whole damn rebellion. The same way a phone call from a 10-cent payphone, right, set in motion a series of events that resolved Operation Just Cause in the outlying areas without a shot fired. Strategic outcomes that are derived from bottom up, right? From framing the problem with relevant stakeholders who live in the problem. You do that stuff, I'm telling you right now, you're less than 1% of the population of leaders who get it. And your relevance and your relatability to your people will be amazing. And if you frame the problem from the bottom up by getting surrounded, getting the right people around the table, they're going to buy into the solution too. The solution will be self-evident and they'll be with you, all right? Man, I get excited about that one. I don't know why, but shit. Because I've seen it work in life and death, and I know it'll sure as hell work in time and money. And the people that I coach on it, when they do it, it works really, really well. The final one I'm going to say is actually, the third piece of getting surrounded, bottom up, timing is everything. The third component of it is go local, right? Really, really get in there and go local. The mantra that I use in Game Changers that's coming out on December 7th is go local or go home. You'll hear me say that on the news. I say that in op-eds. I say that in Fortune 100 companies for leaders. You either go local or go home. In this day and age of trust depletion and high conflict, if you can't go local on a situation, if you can't connect to people, meet them where they are, not where you want them to be, you're not relevant. They're not going to trust you. They're not going to run through walls for you. They're not going to come up to the rooftop for you. You've got to go local. That means getting out there and walking the floor, talking to people. It means your mom was right, 2 ears, 1 mouth, active listening, asking thoughtful, open-ended questions that let people give you their story, and then you process that story through narrative competence, back and forth, and discourse, and you find solutions that make them feel validated, that make them feel included, and they are now bought into your story and your vision. If you have any questions about that, go to rooftopleadership.com. I've got a ton of blog posts on active listening, storytelling, all of the T.E. Lawrence type skills of getting surrounded that we Green Berets use, that I still teach at Fort Bragg, I still teach FBI, I still teach Fortune 100 leaders, and they're timeless, guys, because humans are the kind of creatures that we're going to be for the next 15,000 years at least. We're emotional. We're wired for struggle. We're wired for story. We're wired for meaning. And if you're going to go local, you've got to connect in those ways, right? Using those interpersonal skill sets. It's a muscle, right? Just putting on your hands on your hips and walking around talking to people about the policy. Yeah, they'll smile at you and they'll nod politely, but when you turn your back, bet your ass you have an insurgent that's plotting against you, or at least will be an active resistor or a passive resistor. That's how it goes, right? Going local, getting surrounded, getting in and amongst the folks. And here's a bonus one. I'm going to throw this out here just because I love you. Work yourself out of a job. We have that saying in Special Forces, anywhere you go, work yourself out of a job, right? Avoid the ego. Don't make it about you. Don't make it about your credibility, right? We did this in Afghanistan. We made this mistake. We thought it was about us. So in 2012, 13, when it's time to turn over the Afghan army to let them run things, guess what? They weren't ready. Why? Because we were too busy being in the front. We didn't work ourselves out of a job, right? So I'm imploring you, whatever policy you're putting in place, whatever program you're putting in place, whatever leadership training program you have in place, in addition to getting surrounded, always think about how you're working yourself out of a job. Don't become the single point of failure. Don't be the reason that your VP says, oh, you know what, we'll have to wait till Dan gets back because he's the only one that understands this program, right? Don't make it about your ego or your relevance to the organization or your job security, right? Make it bigger than you. Ensure that what it is that you're pursuing is bigger than you are, that you're punching above your weight, and that you're working yourself out of a job. And if you do that, you'll be amazed at the number of people who will walk through and run through walls for you, who will come up to the rooftop and stand beside you, who will help you frame a problem in a way you could never do on your own and arrive at solutions that are way more strategic than anything you could ever think of. That's the reason Kevin Higgins was able to do what he did, It's the reason Vernon Gillespie was able to put down a strategic rebellion, because they got surrounded on purpose, right? And they went local and they worked themselves out of a job. They didn't take themselves so seriously that they made themselves a single point of failure. These are subtle but strategic skills for leaders. And if you do them, you'll be the most relevant person in the room. People won't even know what it is that you're doing, but they will follow you. And they will follow you through hell and back when you do this. It's time proven. Like, I have no patience for theory. If it doesn't work in combat, if it doesn't work in life and death, I don't use it. And this is the stuff I teach some of the most stellar leaders on the planet who have to go do this for real when it's life and death. So give it a try. Put it into play in your world, right? Use the bottom-up mindset. Think about timing, but get the buy-in from the bottom first. And go local or go home and work yourself out of a job. Think about these things, right, as you work to change the game in your world. And just a reminder, on December 7th, right, Game Changers Edition 2, the Citizens Guide's coming out. And ISIS is not going away. They're busy bees here in the United States, and they will strike us again. And an activated, informed citizenry is the only way that we're going to demand that our politicians and senior military leaders start taking this thing seriously and stop trying to lose and actually start trying to win. And the very principles I talked about today of getting surrounded is what we're going to have to demand at Citizens in the next election. So get your copy of Game Changers on Amazon, hard copy or Kindle. Share it across all of your platforms, and look for us on Rooftop Leadership, Rooftop_leadership on Instagram, official Scott Mann on Facebook, at Real Scott Mann on Twitter. We're going to be putting this stuff out all week on our theme of Get Surrounded. Thanks for what you do, and I can't wait to see you on the rooftop.